Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a joint CTV News CFAX 1070 investigation into the track record of the company running the rails on Vancouver Island. A Freedom of Information request shows that Southern Rail and others knew there were serious problems with the ENN's track months, maybe even years before the service was shut down. CTV's Scott Cunningham has been following this story and joins us now live.
Andrew, in the final months of passenger rail service, roughly 3,000 people rode the rails. But just how safe was the track they put their trust in? Long before the ENN was shut down, the train was rumbling down troubled tracks. The question is, for how long? As far back as 2007, serious safety concerns were surfacing on the ENN line. And by the winter of 2011, behind closed doors, debate over track safety is raging.
When you continue to operate a train on track that is in violation of the rules respecting track safety, it's clearly unsafe.
Jimmy Sturgill is a railway consultant and a former member of an operations committee overseeing safety on the Island Line. He's also the man who sent countless complaints about track safety to federal rail investigators. Those reports would spark an investigation and derail passenger service. A Freedom of Information request has revealed documents showing the highest level of train inspectors in Canada found serious safety concerns with the ENN line, including joint defects, bolt defects, and clusters of poor ties. Would you have let family members ride the train?
No, and actually myself and several of my family members actually told friends and other family not to ride the train.
Documents also show the company in charge of track maintenance, Southern Rail, was clearing the line for passenger service.
What I do know is there was a problem, and whether they were aware of that is irrelevant, but they should have been, because they are supposed to be adequately qualified to inspect the track and identify these conditions.
February 2011, an internal email from Via Rail to the island operator Southern Rail states Via Rail has received an anonymous report relating to poor track conditions on the ENN. The report launches an investigation, and Via Rail doesn't like what it finds. An internal email between Via investigators reads, "I've walked lots of track. Many issues. Track, regulatory, and political." A few days earlier, an email from Southern Rail to Via Rail inspectors states a roadmaster walked the line and found the track is safe for the passage of trains at posted speeds. With conflicting reports, regulators take a harder line. Via Rail and the BC Safety Authority meet in early March. They discuss the uncomfortability and Southern Rail's misrepresentation of the applicable safety rules.
I was selling tickets on a train that I wouldn't put my mother on. Safe. It wasn't safe, actually, in my opinion, for quite some time. But
Debbie Craw checked tickets for Via Rail in Victoria for decades and says she suspected the track was unsafe because of what passengers told her.
In the last probably 7 to 10 months prior to the train stopping, they would express concerns to me saying, "Boy, that was the roughest ride I'd ever had. Are you sure it's safe?"
Facing mounting pressure from provincial and federal rail experts on March 19th, 2011, Southern Rail decides to suspend passenger service and make repairs. But serious questions about the safety of the track don't end there. As Southern Rail pushes to reopen the line, Via Rail investigators continue to find issues where the local company does not. Weeks after the closure, a message between Via inspectors reads, they, Southern Rail, were leaving behind what I felt was a number of defects that should be corrected.
I think that people need to be very concerned about the safety of the railway in the future, based on the history of how it was operated in the time leading up to the sudden shutdown.
We reached out to both Southern Rail and Via Rail more than 24 hours ago, contacting them by email and by phone. Southern Rail has told us they may make a statement, but so far has not. Via Rail has not responded to any of our inquiries. The BC Safety Authority also plays a role in track safety. It released a statement outlining its overall responsibilities as a safety authority, but with no information specific to this case. Tomorrow, we will take a closer look at the future of rail on Vancouver Island and who should be responsible for keeping passengers safe. Andrew?
Okay, Scott, thank you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with more on a CTV News CFAX 1070 investigation, revealing Southern Rail and others knew there were serious problems with the ENN's track months, maybe years before service was shut down in 2011. It's now been more than 48 hours since we first contacted Southern Rail and other stakeholders. We tried over and over again, still no comment and no explanation. CTV's Scott Cunningham is following this story and joins us now with more.
Andrew, I've phoned, I've emailed, and I've phoned again. Southern Rail isn't talking about the past, and neither is Via Rail. But what about the future? The plan is to get passenger service going by next summer, but questions now exist. Is money earmarked enough? And are the right people in place to get wheels rolling safely?
We were not hauling pigs on the railway, we were hauling human beings.
A retired train conductor on the ENN line says he was worried about passenger safety before the train closed in 2011. And the rail consultant says the same company is on track to be behind the controls again.
You know, we need a train on the island, we need the railway, but we need it to be done right.
A Freedom of Information request has shown track safety was up for debate in the final months of passenger service. Internal emails show Via Rail inspectors were finding joint tie defects, bolt defects, and clusters of poor ties. While operator Southern Rail, the same company expected to run trains in the future, was clearing the line for passage at posted speeds.
Management of the ICF has let people down. The operators have let people down.
Following a CTV CFAX investigation, NDP MLA and provincial rail critic Doug Routley is taking aim and firing.
We need to ensure that public funds are protected, but primarily we need to ensure that people are protected. So in order to do that, we need a new governance model that's open, accountable, and transparent.
Routley is calling for the restructuring of upper management at the Island Corridor Foundation. The organization owns the rail line on Vancouver Island and hires the company that runs trains and maintains the track. Board member Ben Isett so far is the only representative with the Island Corridor Foundation to speak to CTV News.
So there's no reason why the train can't come along.
He says despite Freedom of Information documents showing Southern Rail and Via Rail did not see eye to eye on safety standards in the months leading up to the closure, he believes Southern Rail is qualified.
The fact is that the Via Rail board has reached a new agreement with Southern Rail of Vancouver Island. If there were concerns in the past, I would think those concerns have been addressed to Via Rail's satisfaction.
Cost is another question looming large. At present, $20 million in local, provincial, and federal funding is set aside to put trains back online.
It would have to be a minimum $47 million up to $200 million to bring the railway back to a safe operating condition.
But like so many other issues with the ENN, how much it will cost to fix the line is up for debate. Andrew, all of the information in our stories this week came from internal documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request. We have repeatedly asked the stakeholders to answer questions related to what those documents hold, and so far none of them have been willing to talk, and trains are expected to be rolling by next summer.
Okay, we'll keep trying to get that comment. Thanks, Scott. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we continue a joint CTV News CFAX 1070 investigation into the track record of the company running the rails on Vancouver Island. And on the third day of asking questions, we are finally getting some answers. The Transportation Minister and Via Rail both weighing in on a Freedom of Information request showing that Southern Rail and others knew there were serious problems with the ENN's track months, maybe even years before the service was shut down. CTV's Scott Cunningham joins us now live with the latest.
Andrew, people are starting to talk about the future of the ENN line. People with influence. Today, Transportation Minister Todd Stone commented on the CTV CFAX News investigation into track safety. And for the first time since our stories hit the air, Via Rail is talking. Todd Stone says he is aware of the Freedom of Information documents obtained by CTV and CFAX 1070. He would not comment about the state of the rail line in the past, but says he's keeping a close eye on the future, and Southern Rail's plans to bring passenger service back are being closely reviewed.
Certainly safety will be one of the key considerations that actually is part of the review that we're doing of the current business plan. If in the process of reviewing that business plan there are concerns that we believe are raise serious questions about the viability of rail service from a safety perspective, we're not going to be signing off on that business plan.
After several requests for a statement, Via Rail is now responding, saying it has already signed a new agreement with Southern Rail of Vancouver Island and the Island Corridor Foundation, and service will resume on Vancouver Island once repairs of the railway have been completed and the track is deemed safe by all partners. Meanwhile, Minister Stone is also responding to calls from the official opposition. NDP rail critic Doug Routley is calling for management of the Island Corridor Foundation to be restructured. The ICF owns the Island Line and hires the company that maintains it.
Well, I'm going to leave the island politics to the island. What I do know is the Island Corridor Foundation, to this point, has had strong support from most local governments up and down the island, a good number of First Nations as well, lots of community organizations.
So what does it all mean? At this time, the Island Corridor Foundation and Southern Rail are set to rule the rails as they did before safety concerns shut down the track. But this time, they will be under a high-powered microscope. Andrew, Southern Rail and the Island Corridor Foundation have yet to respond to our investigation, but we'll keep trying to get answers.
Safety concerns on the ENN rail line have hit a new and troubling high. This week, without warning, freight service was canceled on 2 major routes. Businesses say they were blindsided, while the company in charge is saying very little. CTV's Scott Cunningham reports.
The railway song falls silent again. In 2011, passenger service on Vancouver Island is derailed by track safety concerns. This week, 2 major freight lines are muted.
Losing that today, that's a serious, serious blow.
Freight trains running between Nanaimo and Duncan and Nanaimo and Parksville have been shut down. In a statement, track operator Southern Rail says after a detailed risk assessment, it was determined that the safest course of action was to temporarily discontinue freight service to Duncan and Parksville. Former Island Mayor and ICF board member Jack Peake says the track was left to rot.
As far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely devastating, but it continues to prove one more time that the efforts that weren't put in to restore the corridor, to repair the corridor.
Devastated is exactly how owners of Top Shelf Feed in Duncan are feeling. The company says today its main artery has been cut. The business uses freight for supplies and deliveries and says Southern Rail gave them 1 day's notice before severing the rail line. Brakes were applied to freight trains just weeks after a joint CTV CFAX 1070 investigation found Southern Rail and other partners knew of serious track problems long before closing the line in 2011.
I was selling tickets on a train that I wouldn't put my mother on.
Track watchdog BC Safety Authority says in the months leading up to the closure, track speeds on all Southern Rail freight trains were dropped to 10 miles per hour and 5 in some areas. In a statement today, the Safety Authority saying Southern Rail's decision to suspend service was based on the realization that necessary infrastructure improvements are not likely to occur in the short term.
They're suspending freight service for most of the island, and it was already down to a bare minimum with very low speeds required to even keep that up. And it's just another indication that the work that should have been done over the years to maintain that railway hasn't been done.
Southern Rail and the Island Corridor Foundation, who owns the ENN line, have been asked for their comments. But like the track itself, the companies aren't making any noise.
Southern Rail won't produce any evidence, but the company says it has faith that the rails passengers were riding on in 2011 were safe. Documents from a Freedom of Information request show high-level Via Rail inspectors were finding serious problems with the company's track before it was shut down over safety concerns. CTV's Scott Cunningham joins us live with more.
Andrew, it's been 2 months since we first aired allegations that Southern Rail and others knew there were safety risks along the ENN line weeks, maybe months, before it was shut down. We've been asking Southern Rail for a response since that report, and this week, we finally got one. Southern Rail is on the offensive. For the first time since an investigation into its safety record before closing down passenger rail, the company is breaking its silence. Were your tracks safe?
Yes, absolutely, they were safe.
During an interview about the company's new transportation agreement to reinstate passenger rail, a representative agreed to answer questions about the CTV CFAX investigation. A Freedom of Information request revealed documents showing Via Rail train inspectors found serious safety concerns with the ENN line before its closure in 2011, including joint tie defects, bolt defects, and clusters of poor ties, while Southern Rail inspectors found nothing wrong. The evidence is here, but the rail operator says it doesn't need it. How can you continue to deny what's in these documents?
Well, you know, I haven't gone through every one of those documents, and I certainly haven't talked to the individuals that made those comments. And, you know, perhaps that's something we need to do.
NDP rail critic Doug Routley says he's not surprised by the company's rebuttal.
I think it's unfortunate that they would, on the one hand, admit they haven't really looked at the documents and then deny their relevance. I think it's important. The information that was uncovered showed that the railway was operating in an unsafe manner.
The investigation references internal Via emails, like one between inspectors saying they want to discuss the uncomfortability and Southern Rail's misrepresentation of the applicable safety standards. Southern Rail says it hasn't seen the communications, but is sure the track was safe.
I certainly have a lot of faith. I've been in railroading many years. There's lots of opinions that different individuals give. And again, I trust my instincts.
Southern Rail is finally talking, but it seems the company's answers are just raising more questions about how safe our rail lines actually are. Since our track record investigation aired in October, we have offered our documents to Southern Rail and other organizations involved. But so far, no one seems to be interested. Andrew?
Okay, Scott, thanks. Too bad. Thank you.